we'll start. So let me start by introducing myself. My name is Ailish Hennessy, and I'm a professor of psychology in the School of Psychology in UCD and one of the co-founders of the Youth Mental Health Lab. We bring you this webinar this evening as part of a research project that's funded by the National Office for Suicide Prevention. And I would like to introduce Anya French, who is the research assistant who is working with me on that project. And I have a slide here that I'm just going to very briefly share just to, before I introduce our main speakers for this evening. And so our research project is looking at the parents' needs for help in relation to adolescents engaged in self-harm. So what information would help parents who have an adolescent engaging in self-harm? And in case anybody here who's listening and would be interested in taking part in the research that's part of that, we will be sharing the link to the survey over the course of this presentation. And also, I will again remind you at the end, and just to say that there is another talk next Monday evening at 7 o'clock. So let me stop sharing that and let me move to the main event, which is to welcome and introduce our two speakers this evening, Sinead Raftery and Leigh Kenny. So Sinead is a part of the research project, and she is joined this evening by Leigh, and Sinead and Leigh are both clinical regional managers working with Pieta, and they both specialize in self-harm and suicide ideation. And we're absolutely delighted to be drawing on their real wealth of experience, and they bring so much knowledge and understanding to their talk this evening. Both of them are qualified psychotherapists, and they are also fully accredited. And again, obviously, they're both drawing on that professional experience in order to bring you this talk. So after the talk, which will last about 35 or 40 minutes, there will be a few minutes for questions, and we'd ask you to please put your questions into the Q&A. Rather, that it will make our lives easier if we just have to follow Q&A rather than chat, but we will share information with you in chat. And so with no further ado, I'm going to hand over to Sinead and Leigh, and Anya and I will turn our cameras off, but we will be here in the background throughout.
Thanks a million for that introduction. I'm going to just start sharing my screen. So I'm Leigh, and I am going to kick it off. And what I'm going to go through with you is understanding self-harm. So I hope everybody can hear me and can see me okay, and I know somebody will let me know if that's not the case. So yes, delighted to be here to be able to present to you some slides around understanding self-harm. So I suppose I feel like it's a really important definition to kick off with, and this has come from the National Institute for Clinical Excellence. So an expression of personal distress, usually made in private, by an individual who hurts him or herself. The nature and meaning of self-harm, however, varies greatly from person to person. In addition, the reason a person harms him or herself may be different on each occasion and should not be presumed to be the same. And we'll move on slightly in around explaining this a little bit further as we go. So some of the self-harm terminologies, you may be familiar with some that I have here on the screen. Self-injury is one. Deliberate self-harm is another one. And non-suicidal self-injury. Self-mutilation is also another, and self-harm. then is another. So for today, for tonight, we're going to focus on the self-harm terminology, and we're going to use that term throughout this presentation. Okay. So types of self-harm. You can see there that there's self-poisoning, scratching, biting, pulling hair, picking skin, cutting, and burning. And I suppose in Pieta, commonly used type of self-harm is cutting. That's the predominant one that we would see the most. So it's important, I suppose, as well, just to go through some myths and facts, as you can imagine myths out there. They can, maybe potentially create a misunderstanding of, what self-harm is. And I think as parents, as educators, I think it's important that we demystify those myths. So I'm going to produce some facts with a couple of myths that I'm going to go through with you now. And I think knowing the facts, I think it helps ground us as individuals, as parents, as educators, to be able to attend to loved ones' distress or questioning, or even being aware of some of the red flags that you might come across. So you'll see the first myth that I've popped up there: self-harm is attention seeking. And you might, as a parent, include the phase young people are going through this phase. So it's they'll move out of it, is something that we can hear often, or that it's attention seeking behavior. And actually, the fact is that many who engage in self-harm behavior find it hard to reach out and ask for help. And help, self-harm is actually attention needing. So there's a need in that individual who is self-harming, that need needs to be met. And it's about how we meet that need is the key here, and it's the important piece. So yes, whilst you might be thinking it's a phase or their attention seeking, there is a need there that needs to be met, and we'll take it very seriously. So the other myth is people who self-harm must enjoy it. And the fact there is that there is no evidence that people who self-harm feel pain differently than anyone else. And for some, being depressed has left them numb, and they want to feel anything to remind them that they are alive, even if it hurts. So that unbearable pain, just wanting to do something differently, even if even if it hurts, that is the fact of that myth there. Then the last myth, people who self-harm are suicidal. And again, the fact is that for many, self-harm is about trying to cope with difficult feelings in their life circumstances, and that people have described it as a way of staying alive and surviving these difficulties. However, people who self-harm can feel suicidal and might attempt to take their own life. And again, this is why it is so important that we must always take it seriously. So some signs to look out for if you feel like your child is self-harming. So unexplained cuts, bruises, bite marks, bruises, or bald patches. I don't know about you, but I know for me, I would have bruises on an ongoing basis, but I can explain them. I know that I've either banged my leg off the dishwasher or whatever it is, I can explain where they are. So bearing in mind, it's the unexplained, persistent cuts or burns or bite marks or bruises or bald patches. And again, just, I know we're moving into the winter time, but just from if you notice that your loved one is wearing clothes in the summertime that are long sleeved, let's say, jumpers or long sleeved tops, but long leggings maybe, or jeans or something like that, and not wanting to be around others or avoiding activities like swimming. Whilst you notice all the other children are wearing the maybe appropriate clothes for that particular season, they could potentially be covering up something. So again, just bearing that in mind, if it is something that is ongoing, that is happening throughout the summertime, it's potentially a red flag. Also, you might notice some bloody tissue in the waste bin. Again, you know, if it's persistent, if it's something that is there all the time, and again unexplained, that again is a further sign to look out for. And then from a behavior perspective, if there's a change in how they're feeling, if they're seeming low or depressed, you know, again, not engaging in the usual activities around families and friends, activities, that could potentially be another sign around how they're feeling and about themselves. And blaming themselves is another one for problems, or expressing feelings of failure, you know, not good enough. Why didn't I not get that 100% when I only got 99%? Or how come I didn't pass and I did so well with my studying, and I really worked hard to get that percentage. So that blaming themselves, or you know, I'm always getting things wrong. I'm never getting things right. I can never do right. So that feeling of uselessness as well. And again, it's a persistent, you know, blaming of and way of talking to self is a red flag as well, and a sign. And outbursts of anger, again, you know, everybody can get angry, and that's not necessarily a red flag. But if again it's a change in behavior, an outburst of anger, and it's persistent, that could potentially be a sign as well. And self-loathing, you know, again, that not being good enough, you know, up to the mark, or you know, I don't look like everybody else, or you know, punishing them, or wish to punish themselves for whatever reason. And again, as I outlined these signs, they're independent signs. But if you're noticing that these signs are combined, it may well be the red flag, in order for you to explore the situation further. Um, so, although self harm may be seen as a damaging and destructive way of coping, the why behind the hurting oneself is varied and complex, and can differ from child to child. So it's not uh, one a black and white scenario here. And I think that's a really important piece to know, that it is complex and it can vary. And every self-harm presentation, the reasons behind the why also can differ, and it doesn't have to be the same reason all of the time. It can be several different reasons. So we know that children self-harm because they are unable to communicate their distress, and again, being that overwhelming feeling, that unable to self-regulate their emotions. And then their body becomes a canvas that expresses their overwhelming feelings. So some of the reasons why children will turn to self-harm, again, we know that it can support, reduce or express very strong emotions, of, you know, fear, as I was saying earlier on, anger, or feeling bad about themselves. You know, so sadness even can be included in on that. So it's about managing that, or reducing that, or expressing that piece. And also it could potentially be to relieve tension and pressure, or to reduce feelings of panic and anxiety, and temporarily feel calmer. So not knowing what else to do, or you know, not being able to make sense of what it is that's going on, and this can be a possible reason to feel that temporary calm feeling. Um, but also, um, they may need to experience a feeling of physical pain to distract from emotional pain. You know, even if it hurts, as we said earlier on, that feeling of numbness, but to actually feel something different, it can distract from that feeling, even if it hurts. And then also, they may need the need to gain a sense of control over feelings or problems. So, for example, by feeling that there's something that they can do when things feel too much. Not being able to be in control of other things or other feelings, again, that out of control or overwhelming feeling, not understanding how to manage that or how to control that, and they may need to feel that sense of control when things get too much. And also, stop feeling numb or zoned out. And that's a common one, that zoned out one, which can be a protection mechanism for our bodies when we're experiencing overwhelming feelings. And um, just going through the cycle of self-harm from a visual perspective, I always use this with my young clients and also guardians, parents of those clients, because when we can see kind of what is happening, sometimes it can support us in understanding what's happening and gain that sense of understanding as well. So while it often feels like self-harm brings some relief in the moment, it is only temporary. And you can see there at the top, there's an emotional suffering, and whatever that rationale is or whatever that reason is, it's that emotional suffering that that person can't understand, can't get away from, possibly can't make sense of it, and the pain is just so hard, it's so difficult. And then there's that emotional overload then, that kicks in then. And then again, not being able to do anything with it, don't know where to go with it, that sense of panic then starts to kick in. And that's when the self-harm potentially happens, and the act of self-harm happens. And then the person does feel that temporary relief at that time, and we know that it is in that moment that it is only temporary. And then as a result of that, the person may start to feel shame or even grief or ashamed or confused or frightened about the fact that they're self-harming. Um, they may have told, their parents or their friends, I'm not going to do that again, or even, not being able to cope because they can maybe tell that their friends are coping with all of this emotional stuff that is going on. And they can't. So it's again, what's wrong with me scenario? Why can't I not do that? So then that is part of that cycle, and then it can increase the emotional load that they're already carrying on top of what they're already going through. And we know that when a person inflicts pain upon him or herself, the body responds by producing endorphins, which is a natural pain reliever that gives temporary relief or feelings of peace. So again, it can potentially be an addictive nature of this feeling that can make the stopping of self-harm quite difficult. And we know that young people who self-harm still feel pain, but some say the physical pain is easier to stand than the emotional or mental pain that lead to the self-harm initially. So I'm going to stop sharing at this point, and Sinead is going to take over, and she's going to carry on with some tips for parents in responding to what I've just covered now.
Thanks a million, Leigh. And just bear with me, guys, for a moment, just as I share my screen. Okay, so I suppose just to focus on some tips then, because if you just find out that your child is self-harmed, whatever way you found that information out, it's an extremely overwhelming and frightening place to be, and can really really invoke a lot of anxiety, which is completely normal. So I suppose the first step we need to take is take a deep breath, because it can be a shock. So unless you're superhuman, shock and disbelief are kind of some of the most common emotions that we can feel initially. But it is really important that that we respond in a calm and informed manner, because having a strategy of how you're going to approach your child at this distressing time for them is going to be really set the scene and help set the scene of how things are going to go next. So I just want to show you a really helpful exercise that I do with a lot of parents and children that attend our service with self-harm and suicidal ideation. And it's helpful for parents in that, this is part of all of our brains. This is something that it's a function that happens as all. So I just want to invite you to put up your hands, just one hand, just like in the diagram. And I just want to bring your attention. This is going to represent our brain. So the bottom part of our brain here, the bottom part of the palm, is kind of the earliest part of our brain that's developed. It's the reptilian brain. It's where all our automatic responses come from. So, the things we don't want to have to think about on a daily basis, like our blood pressure, or digestion, breathing, or heart rate, really vital stuff happens here, but it just happens automatically. Okay, so it's the reptilian part of the brain. It's where our survival mechanism is. So just want to invite you to cross over your thumb now in the middle of your palm. And this part of the brain represents the limbic system. So this is where all our big emotions live, okay? And it's also where, we start to perceive threat. So it's like, if anybody ever had the experience of going to cross the road and you didn't realize a car was coming, and without even thinking, you step back and, you didn't have the thought, the car is coming, I need to move my feet. It happened automatically. So this is the part of the brain that detects threat, but it's also the part of the brain where the big emotions lie. So you can imagine, if you hear something that's causing you distress or shock, this part of the brain, you can be sure, is highly activated. So it's activating your emotions. I'm just going to invite you now to put your fingers down over your thumb and touch in your palm. This represents what we call a regulated brain. So this is where, our fingers represent the top part of our brain, our prefrontal cortex. This is where, we have the skill of thinking things through in a rational way. This is where our logic center is. And this part of the brain is under development as child and adolescence. In particular, in adolescence, it's in, there's a high level of development going on in the prefrontal cortex. So that's why sometimes teenagers can be more inclined to, act first and think later, because actually the part of the brain where they can think things through in a logical way is still developing. And they actually say this part of our brain is developing right up to the age of 30. And some of us might argue maybe some adults in our life, it might take a little bit longer, I don't know, but that's what they say. So that represents the regulated brain. So that means that my logical brain, my emotional brain, and the brain where my survival mechanism is all communicating together. However, as I said, when we hear something that's shocking or distresses us in some way, the thumb part of our brain, the limbic system, becomes highly activated and sometimes can take over. So our emotions can take over. And what can happen is, just want you to raise your fingers up, we flip our lids. So the emotional, the logical part of our brain where we can think things through is impaired, and we're now, our emotions are in full control. So instead of maybe responding to a situation, we start to react. And again, I'm sure we can all identify with that. At some stage in our life, we've probably reacted in a situation rather than responded. But in this kind of situation where you want to approach your child in relation to self-harm, it's really important that our brains are regulated, that those three pieces are communicating with each other, and that if we recognize that, again, we're shocked, which is completely normal, or our anxiety levels are up, that's why it is so vital that we take a deep breath, take a step back, and approach this in a calm manner. Also, if you realize that your child is in a dysregulated state, where they're in a highly emotional state, you can help them regulate to start bring down their prefrontal cortex, that part of the brain that's going to help them actually hear what you're saying, or create an environment where they're more likely to hear what you're saying. Because actually, when we flip our lids, when the emotional brain takes over, that part of the brain actually doesn't understand words. So if you're trying to speak to your child and their emotions have completely took over, they flip their lids, the logical part of the brain is now really disarmed because the emotions have took over. You're not going to access them. So what we want to do is we want to model calm to the child, because by you using your body language, your tone of voice, your eye contact, helping them take a deep breath, you're going to model it, maybe giving them the time and space to just have a drink of water and just help them get into that calmer space. Then you're better placed then to have this next piece of conversation with them. So hopefully that makes sense and might be helpful to you. So again, we're saying, if you notice any of those signs that Leigh mentioned earlier, but even if you just have a sense that there's something wrong, you know your child really well. So, trust your instinct. By checking it out, you're not going to lose any ground. The worst thing that can happen is that you're wrong. But the best thing is that if there is something wrong, you're now creating a space where they can share that with you. Even if they don't do it straight away, you're opening up that door where they can share it. So acting swiftly, if you notice any of those signs, don't put it off. Do, take that breath, but do start to put in a plan around how am I going to speak to my child. Being direct, naming your concerns is really important. Timing in starting the conversation as well. So what I mean by that is making sure that you're approaching them in that regulated space and helping them regulate, but also maybe doing it in a neutral space. So it might be, go for a walk with them, or, do an activity and start this conversation, rather than maybe going after the big chat, where you're setting this big massive scene that might already feel overwhelming to them, and starting the conversation in somewhere neutral. So maybe not necessarily in their bedroom, which is their kind of space, just a neutral space can be really helpful as well. And really focus kind of on how they're doing rather than the why straight away. And again, it's completely understandable that we want to go in with the why, because in self-harm it's hard to get our heads around. It's hard to get our heads around that somebody we love is harming themselves, and of course we want to try and understand the why. But the reality is your child may not know the why at this point, and actually by us asking that, we might actually overwhelm them further and we might start to shut them down. So instead of focusing on the why, check in more on how they're doing. So how they're feeling. Say you notice that there might be upset, or you noticed a change in their mood, and you're wondering, is there anything wrong, or is there anything that you can help them with, without bombarding them for information. So then, whatever way you found out that your child might be self-harming, just some tips maybe on how to approach then that conversation and being direct. So, if you found out maybe from the teacher, you could say something like, your teacher told me that you had been hurting yourself, and I'm really concerned for you. I want you to know that you can talk to me about it and let me help you. So, you're opening the door. Or if you notice something yourself in any of those signs that Leigh spoke about, you might say something like, I noticed a scar, or I noticed scars on your arm. Have you been self-harming? I'd really like to help you. And if you don't feel like you want to talk to me, I can set up an appointment for you to speak to somebody who can help. Okay. And again, using the word self-harm is important, because if they haven't been self-harming, you're not going to put them at risk of self-harming. If they're not self-harming, by asking them, you're not going to put the idea in their head. But by you using the word self-harm, you might actually build the confidence that actually, yeah, you can hear this information. So you're building confidence in them that you really want to know the answer to this. So you're asking it in an open open manner. So again, listening is so important. Quite often, particularly when somebody in our life is in pain, we listen and we're already trying to find a solution in our head because we desperately want to take that pain away. And again, that's such a natural thing for us to do. But the greatest gift you can give your child at this point in time is to listen in order to hear. Okay, so don't go in and try and come up with solutions and fixes straight away, but just listen to what's going on for them. And showing empathy, so again, you're showing empathy in your body language, in your tone of voice, so you're letting them know that you want to hear whatever it is that's going on for them. You want to hear it, and you can hear it. You're capable of hearing whatever it is that is going on. Again, just to mention, you want to stay curious, and you don't want to go in with the whys straight away, but again, you're coming from the point, I want to gain understanding of how you're feeling right now, and gain that understanding, not by putting pressure on them on trying to give you the answer straight away, but you just want to support them at this time, and you've noticed their distress, and that you are concerned for them. So if the child remains resistant and denies that there is a problem or that they self-harm, as parents, you are responsible for their physical and psychological welfare. So you're not betraying them by openly admitting that help is required. So, I suppose it's about not making promises that you can't keep. More than likely you may need to get some help, whether it be professional help or linking in with the GP as well. So just making sure that you're reaffirming that message that you really want to help, and that you understand that maybe they're freaking out, and they might not want other people to know, but that you really want to support them at this time. So if they insist that they don't have a problem, and you really feel you've seen things that you feel, no, I've noticed persistent cuts or scratches, as Leigh said, or persistent bruises, or I've found those bloody tissues in the bin, it's no harm to say to them, you'd like it confirmed by the GP or by a professional, by a therapist, because you are concerned. So you're keeping going in with that message that you are concerned for them and that you really want to help. And give your child a few options of where you will bring them. So, again, we're constantly trying to bring them collaboratively with us. That is the best way in which we can approach it. It's not always possible, but we're going to absolutely try and give them options so that they feel empowered, rather than something that's happening to them and being forced into it. We want to gently try and encourage them along with us. So that's, whether you're giving them options to go to the GP or speak to a therapist or come to the likes of Pieta, whatever those options are. And you want to do this without trying to make them feel guilty or obliged to see someone. But you're reaffirming that message. You want to ensure that your child is aware that you are concerned, and you're being very clear about that. You are concerned. So even if they're saying, no, there's nothing to worry about, you've seen very specific things that you are worried about, then you're going in with that concrete statement that, I hear you saying that, but I am really concerned for you, and I love you, and I'm really concerned. So, and also, even saying that you see they are in distress and that you really want to help and support them. And I suppose it's really important that if your child has any injuries or wounds that require medical attention, that you do bring them to the GP and they are attended to, because again, sometimes that is a part to self-harm that we do need to monitor, as well as regards the management of wounds. So then, I suppose, helping your child in the shorter term, so becoming more aware of how they feel when they self-harm and what's making them feel this way. So again, you're listening to gain understanding, and then looking at what kinds of things will help and will empower your child to feel more in control. And I'm going to go through some strategies in the next few slides. And you really want to even look at what other things might help them in that moment where they feel like self-harming, that will help them, as we call, kind of ride the wave of those intense feelings that can help, that can build up right before self-harm. So we want to look at different strategies that can help, because as Leigh said, we do recognize that self-harm is a coping strategy, it's a coping mechanism, whatever's going on for the child in this moment, it is a coping mechanism, and maybe the only coping mechanism at this point in time. So when we work with children in Pieta House in relation to self-harm, you know, our key goal of our therapy is to help move the person from self-harm to self-care. So, you know, we don't necessarily take out something that might be the only thing that's helping them cope at this moment in time without trying to replace it with something else. So that's a key focus of therapy, along with knowing the triggers and helping the child identify the meaning and function of the self-harm. Then it's about putting in strategies that can help, alternative things that might help them in that moment. And I suppose we have to remember, when we are coming up with strategies and alternatives, different things will work for different people as well. And the strategies that we do, that we would suggest to a child, you know, it'll depend on what feelings they're trying to manage as well. So, you know, if it's something whereby, you know, they're feeling overwhelmed and they want to soothe themselves in some way, then, you know, we'd be looking at more soothing things, whether, you know, it's wrapping yourself in a warm blanket, or, you know, having something that you're going to feel soothed by. Whereby if it's more kind of burning off energy, or, you know, feeling really angry and wanting to lash out, you know, it might be more active kind of strategies, where it might be exercise, or, you know, hitting a pillow or something like that. And I'm going to go through some tips now as regards to strategies. So again, this is something that you can help your child with as well, and help them come up with strategies. So I'm just going to name some strategies just for you to have some knowledge as well around them. So making a self-soothe box can be really helpful. And by that I mean, you know, that a box of they're things that help them, you know, whether it be something that, you know, they can touch, to, like a stress ball or something that they can, you know, burn off that energy, whether it's something soothing, like, you know, their favorite smell, or, you know, it might be a picture, it might be a memory that will help soothe them, or it might be that they have their favorite playlist, and that because we know music is quite emotive, so sometimes people find that really helpful in managing the urges to self-harm. Or it might be, you know, their favorite bar of chocolate, that's something, a taste that helps them in that moment. So that self-soothe box can be really helpful too. Again, not for everybody is different, and that's why we've lots of options here. Writing down how they feel in a journal can be another coping strategy, or writing down difficult feelings on a piece of paper and then ripping them up. So again, you can see there's more energy in that, so that ripping them up, or ripping up a magazine or newspaper, again, you're burning off that energy or that pent up tension. Hitting a soft cushion pillow or beanbag. Again, if they're hitting something, we want them to hit something that they're not going to injure themselves, but yet they're going to get that energy out. As I already mentioned, listening to soothing music, or listening to loud music if it's something that they want to burn off. As Leigh said earlier, sometimes people will self-harm because, you know, maybe they feel numb, they feel like they're not feeling anything, and they self-harm to actually try and feel again. So even having a cold shower might be enough to actually help them jolt back and feel again. Or if it's soothing, then maybe having a shower, you know, a hot shower, not too hot obviously, but that soothing flow of the water can be very soothing. Doing some exercise, going for a walk outside, or taking the dog for a walk, focusing on their breathing. So you know, breathing techniques are hugely helpful and hugely grounding, but particularly in people that are trying to manage an anxiety, you know, breathing exercises are vital in that, because they activate the part of our nervous system that sends a message to our brain to calm down, that everything is okay. So, you know, we do a lot of breathing exercises with our clients in Pieta, because it really helps reduce anxiety and reduce tension. And sometimes breathing exercises can be hard to get buy-in initially with people, because they might have tried them before and thought, oh, you know, that didn't work, I didn't really do anything. But the thing with breathing exercises in particular is around you know, sometimes we only do them when our anxiety is really high. But the trick is, if somebody asked me to run 10K right now, I probably wouldn't be able to do it because I haven't trained. But if I trained, my body would know what I'm trying to do. So it's the same with breathing exercises. We need to be practicing breathing exercises so that when we really need them, it gets to that place in our tummy that's able to activate what we call the parasympathetic nervous system to send that message to the brain and create that sense of relaxation. Again, if the child is, you know, if the urge is to want to soothe oneself, again, wrapping up in a blanket or duvet, talking to someone, you know, expressing their emotion, a family friend, or family, or a friend, or calling a helpline. You know, Pieta, we have a 24/7 helpline with fully qualified and accredited therapists. You know, it's a really easy helpline number to remember. It's 1-800 24/7 24/7. And we also have a text line number where people can text help to 51444. So that's available to people as well. Tidying and organizing something. So again, Leigh mentioned that sometimes people self-harm because they want to distract themselves from that intense or overwhelming feeling. So again, focusing the mind on something else can be really helpful way of coping in the moment. Or doing a hobby that they enjoy that helps them feel calm, such as painting, drawing, colouring in, watching their favorite TV program, playing video games, kind of comes with a health warning, depends on what reaction they get from video games, or cooking or baking. So again, you know, it's creating that distraction. It's an expression of helping them feel calm, depending on what urge is there to self-harm. So we either want something that's going to burn off the tension, create distraction, or be soothing for the person. So then seeking professional help. Again, I suppose we really just want to drive home this message, you know, you're not alone and your child is not alone. And the reality is, you know, we see a lot of children can go through this time in their life where, you know, self-harm does become a coping mechanism, and it by no means that they can't work through this and get support and move forward. And you know, there are services out there that help, whether that be that initial contact with the GP, which can be always a good place to start, whether it's ourselves in Pieta, you know, people can contact us directly, and I'm going to go into our services a little bit more in a minute. CAMS, the Child and Adolescent Mental Health Service, again, is another key service that can be of huge help. And quite often the GP can be good in guiding whether, you know, it's where, you know, CAMS would be the most appropriate referral, or whether, you know, Pieta or another private community or voluntary service may be of help. And also just to mention, the HSC run a fantastic programme funded by NOSP called Understanding Self-Harm, and that's for parents. So again, that's a fantastic psychoeducational programme that can be a great resource to parents. So Pieta services then, so, you know, we provide one-to-one counselling for people who are experiencing suicidal ideation, engaged in deliberate self-harm, and who have been bereaved by suicide. So I'm just going to focus on the intervention service tonight, obviously, because we're speaking about self-harm. So we provide face-to-face phone and video therapy. We don't require a letter of referral. So, you know, parent can ring up the service and make an appointment for an assessment. We have over 20 locations nationwide. We provide up to 12 sessions of free therapy. And again, if more sessions are required, that will be discussion with the therapist and the parent and the child. We can add more sessions as necessary. Our model in which we work is a strengths-based and solution-focused model. So we draw a lot on CBT and DBT within our model. And when a child is engaged in our service, then we also provide support to parents through what we call key support sessions. So key support is where a parent can avail of 4 sessions of therapy, 50 minutes in duration, with a therapist separate to their child's therapist. So it's separate sessions. And it's a space where, you know, you can gain support yourself, because this is a time of huge stress. You know, it's probably one of the most stressful situations in supporting your child at this time, but it's also, you know, gives you the knowledge and, you know, explores, you know, responses and techniques that might be helpful in supporting your child through this crisis at this time. So it can be really good support for parents alongside their child engaging in therapy. So when a parent contacts our service, we will offer an assessment appointment. And while the child then is waiting for therapy, while they're on our waiting list, we do offer what we call holdover appointments. So anybody that's on our waiting list, if as a parent you feel that your child needs to speak to a therapist urgently, or you've noticed something that's concerning you while you're waiting for therapy, you can ring in to our national number, which I'll show you now, and we will offer a holdover appointment with a qualified therapist who will do that check-in session and review the risk again. So again, I suppose that's key, that while you're waiting for therapy, you still have access to our counselling teams. So our national number to make an assessment appointment is 0818 111 126. And as I mentioned earlier, we also have our 24-hour helpline number, which is 1800 24/7. And just to say as well, that helpline number, it's not just for the person that's in the crisis, it's also for people who may need advice if their loved one is in crisis. So, if you're concerned about something, don't be afraid to pick up the phone to the helpline number. There is a fully qualified therapist on the end of that line that will help navigate your concern with you. And also, as I mentioned earlier, that text line number as well. And again, that's manned by a fully qualified therapy team. Text help to 51444. So finally, just want to just put up this image for a moment, because everything I've spoken about tonight, if you're in a situation where you are concerned about your child or a loved one that's self-harming, it is hugely stressful. And when we're in that mode of worrying and caring for somebody else, sometimes we forget about ourselves and forget about our own self-care. And of course, if we're not taking care of ourselves, we're not going to be best placed then to support our loved ones, because if our battery is already running low, then it takes a lot of energy to support somebody in crisis. So if I checked in with everybody here on tonight and I asked, what level the battery of your phone is at right now, we probably all have some level of awareness of what level it's at, because we tend to plug in our phones as something we tend to monitor. But yes, we can totally ignore our own batteries. We can be practically running on empty and we totally ignore it. So I suppose just to finally just reflect again, take a step back. How are you looking after yourself, particularly if you are supporting a loved one in crisis? What are you doing to recharge your batteries? Because self-care, as it says there, is not a luxury, it is a priority, and particularly when we are in that space where we're caring for somebody and supporting somebody. So thank you so much for listening to myself and Leigh tonight, and I will hand you back to Ailish.
Sinead and Leigh, thank you so much for a really fantastic presentation, and really, I think, giving everybody huge insight into self-harm, and also the tips are extremely useful for anybody to have. So thank you very much for that. So if you don't mind, we might ask just a few questions that have been coming in over the course of the presentation. So Anya and I are going to take turns in reading them out to you. So the first question that came in says, say you find out about self-harm only after it has stopped. So as a parent, is there still something you should be doing? Can you help in any way at that point?
Yeah. Sorry, Leigh. I suppose what's coming to my mind is, again, it's like, okay, let's have a conversation around maybe, is there anything that I can support you with right now? If there was a time in your life, even if it has finished, where you were self-harming, is there anything we can do that, might help build again some strategies that, if you were feeling stressed again or in distress, that you would have alternative coping strategies. So I do think it's still something that would be good to have a conversation and explore, even if the child is saying that they have.
Just to jump in there as well, I think it's a really important thing to home in on about how did they stop? You know, what strengths did they have in themselves in order to stop and to utilize those strengths again? And as Sinead said, have that safety plan. Should they feel those emotions or feel the need or the desire to self-harm again? So focusing in on what did they do, because they've obviously done something amazing to support themselves in order to stop. But again, maintaining good, healthy lifestyle is really important as well to sustain and to maybe refrain from self-harm and going back to self-harm.
Thanks, Leigh. Those are both really useful. Anya, do you want to choose a question there?
Yeah, there's loads of really interesting questions. I suppose actually what it might be interesting to know, just Sinead or Leigh, would you recommend that somebody rings the Pieta line if their question doesn't get answered here, just because we have an awful lot of questions, or what would you suggest that they do if it doesn't get answered today?
Yeah, absolutely. Or I mean, if we have any details, like, I mean, they can email actually into mary@pieta.ie, and we'll do our very best, myself and Leigh will do our very best to respond and get back to people.
Perfect. So one of the first questions we have is actually, is self-harm typically hidden by the individual?
I suppose we know that self-harm is typically hidden because of the shame and the guilt and you know, that emotion that comes with it as well. There is a feeling of doing something wrong, maybe, you know, why can't I not cope? So there is that element there. So when you're feeling like that, it's very hard to talk to somebody or even use the language or find the words to be able to talk to somebody about that. So it tends to be hidden for the most part.
Thank you both. Another question that came in early on was a young person who was self-harmed. Are they prone to self-harming again? Is that something a parent should be concerned about? Is that likely to happen again, or are they likely to you know, be able to regulate their emotions better after a time?
Yeah, so I suppose again, it's like, you know, building those coping strategies is going to be really key, and helping the person understand what was the role and function of self-harm. So I suppose we can never say never on anything like that, but I suppose there's nothing to say that they are definitely going to go back to that coping strategy, but it's kind of the work that they do right now and understanding it and building the resilience and building the strategies to cope with stress is going to be really key moving forward.
Thank you very much, Anya.
Yes, there's just a question here on any tips for having a conversation, for a parent having a conversation with their child when they're not sure if there's self-harm going on. So they haven't seen necessarily possibly the signs yet.
So I suppose I'm sure that parent has seen something that they're concerned about. If they're kind of thinking about, I may need to have a conversation. So again, it's around, you know, picking that time, making sure you're regulated, picking a time where you feel you're helping your child regulate to have that conversation, and then, you know, approaching it with what you are concerned about, because you've obviously have a sense of something, that there's something wrong. So just again, laying the ground, opening that door, that you're there, you know, you just want to check in, you've noticed A, B, C, or D, and that you are concerned for them, you know, so you're just opening that door and opening that conversation.
Thanks, Sinead. Just for we'll take just another couple of questions, but what I'm going to do, if you don't mind, is I am going to share my screen for the final few minutes. Firstly, just to tell you all that next Monday we've got Madeline Connolly and Katie Murphy, who again are going to talk about self-harm in young people. And also, just I will leave that up just while we answer the last few questions about our survey. And if you look in the chat box, you will see that Anya has shared a link to the survey in that. So I thought there was one question that really interested me in the questions, Sinead and Leigh. It was someone who said, how would you have a conversation with a parent when that parent has no idea their child is self-harming? Is there a something you could ask?
Suppose being honest is the best policy, and if there's a factual basis for the conversation or understanding what is actually going on, because obviously that parent would need to know and want to know what to do and how to do it to support their child. So trying to have that honest conversation with what they know about what that child is doing, or even how that child is presenting, is a really important piece. And again, knowing that the conversation is coming from a place of concern and absolute empathy and compassion, I think that will really stand to that parent talking to that other parent as well.
And again, quite often it can be such a shocking thing to hear. So, don't kind of be put off if the parent just kind of can't believe that this has happened, because that absolutely is a normal response. So giving the person space to actually process the information you're giving them as well. And if that means they need to go away and then you need to come back and have a further conversation with them, that's okay as well. But as Leigh said, it is most important that they know your concern if you have noticed.
Anya, I just noticed a couple of people have said that they don't see the link in chat to the survey. Have I got it wrong? Was the link shared in chat?
It was, but I can send it again.
That would be great. Thank you very much.
Oh, I may have sent it to panelists. Sorry.
That's great. Thank you very much indeed. And actually, in fact, you can use the QR code on the screen at the moment as well. Sorry, of course, I just moved it off screen there. So maybe one final question, Anya, if you
Yeah, we've just had a couple of questions around waiting times in Pieta. How long before a first session?
I suppose in Pieta, what we do is we will offer an assessment first. So that is to make sure that we are the best service to be of help at this point in time. And then from our waiting list, we obviously we monitor the level of risk when we do an assessment. So again, going back to the piece that for anybody who's waiting for an appointment, they still have access to the therapy team through holdovers. And obviously, if a person is on our waiting list and they are availing of holdovers, that means that the level of risk is going up. So we're constantly monitoring that. So I suppose, not to give a vague answer, but wait times can vary, as in certain times of the year are more extremely busy than other times, and we're doing our absolute best to respond as quickly as possible to people. But just to say, for anybody that is waiting, that holdover appointment is still there as well while you are waiting for therapy.
And also wait times can depend on the person's specific day and time as well that they can attend. So we notice with young people, they can only attend in the evening time or possibly on a Saturday. So that could potentially hold up their start time as well. So we do encourage all of our clients to try and take the first available appointment as if they can. So as we know, that can tend to have an impact as well on the waiting list, or on the wait time rather.
Okay, so it is after 8 o'clock now, so I'm going to draw proceedings to an end. Again, please remember that we're back again next Monday evening at 7 o'clock. We'd be delighted if you would be interested in joining us then. But most of all this evening, I just want to thank Sinead and Leigh so much for a really, really fantastic talk, so informative, so full of really useful information for parents. And just to say it, so Anya has said this in chat, but all of our presentations will be recorded and they will be available on the UCD Youth Mental Health Lab website within the next 2 weeks. So you will be able to watch them again then. So thank you, everybody. And we look forward to seeing you all again